My name is JT, and welcome to Out of the Far, a podcast where we will tackle life's toughest struggles together. Whether you're feeling the heat of life challenges or looking for ways to live better, you are in the right place today. Each week, we'll share stories, insights, and encouragement to help you rise stronger and thrive in your life. No matter what you're facing, let's step out of the far and into a better life and do it together. Doing life together. You know, in life, everyone has a story, and yet not all stories are the same. Some of us go through some tough things. We really do. If I can use the analogy, though, we are all in this massive ocean of life together. And we all have what we call our boats of life. And you are the captain of your life. Now, as much as some of us would want to hand off our life decisions to others or blame others for our boat's direction, it cannot be done. You say, why? Because you and you alone are in command of your boat's oars, sails, or maybe you're an outside the box thinker, and you upgraded that boat with a motor, and you're just speeding on through this life just as fast as you could go in that boat. I know some people that do. My main point is, in life, you're going to do what you want to do. You're not going to listen to nobody tell you what to do with your life unless you really want to, and you're going to determine what direction your boat of life heads. Now, to say some of us headed into the wrong direction a time or two in our life would be an understatement. We've rode into massive storms, massive waves. We've taken damage from life. Some of us have taken so much damage, we feel it's a lost cause, we're doomed, we're gonna sink. And you see it all the time. People go out, they get hung up on something, they blow something bad in life, and they think, you know what, there's just no hope. So I'm just gonna end it. They go out, they take their life thinking, I'll just end the suffering once and for all and be done with it. But the question that comes up, is that really the end? And that brings me to the first subject I want to talk about in this very first podcast. And it's probably the biggest question that we all ask ourselves in this life. Is there really something out there after I die? Life after death? God, Satan, angels, demons? The question, do they exist? Oh, but what would the world's richest of rich give for an answer to that question, or to a small glimpse into that supernatural realm if it truly existed? I know we all have to close our eyes at some point for the last time. What would you give to know and look into that supernatural realm if it existed? I know I would give anything. I would give everything I have for a glimpse into that supernatural world. The physical world we live in now versus a spiritual world to possibly come. Now, growing up, I came from a good family. I was called a PK, a preacher's kid. And yes, it's true. I'm not going to deny it. Some of us preachers' kids can be the worst. I'm sure not going to sit here and tell you I didn't pull some things when I was young. I did, and still not perfect today. But I can tell you, being raised a preacher's kids, my parents believed in the supernatural realm. They did. My dad was a traveling evangelist. In fact, he traveled all over the world as an evangelist. And a big part of his ministry was dealing with people who had been involved in the occult. He told me about a story where he went to a church in California. He said there were some 75 people that lined up in the church after he got done with his sermon. And he said they had all been involved in the occult. And he began to pray over each and every one of them. And he said, son, as I lay my hands upon them, these spirits would begin to vomit up out of them like a big pile of black ash and would cover the floor of the church up front. He said by the time he was done casting those demons out, that they had a 2 or 3 foot pile of black ash, and they actually had to bring in wheelbarrows and shovels and clean up the church. Now, when he told me that, I laughed at him. I didn't believe it. I did not. You say, why not? Because I'd seen enough religion being a preacher's kid, and by the time I was 20, I just didn't believe it anymore. Growing up, I'd seen nonstop religion, nonstop judgment, nonstop legalism. Can't do this, can't do that. Why, half the time it seemed the leadership and the congregation in the church were going out doing the very thing they preached about not doing. So on one hand, you had your mentors telling you can't do this, you can't do that. Yet secretly, they're going out doing the very thing you can't do. Well, they get caught eventually. You know, I've seen affairs. I've seen people that drank on the side, had drug habits on the side. You know, there are good people. There are people that never do these things. But I've seen an endless cycle of people come in and go out, come in and go out. And so what would happen? They would fall out of church. And as a preacher's kid, seeing this endless cycle, I thought, you know what? Half these people were my mentors, older than me, when I was under them many times in different situations. I was actually training to be a minister myself at that time. And I thought, you know what? If these people who are my mentors, they can't live it, how can I possibly live it? How can I possibly be a preacher if some of the preachers can't even make it, and the people that's been around in the congregation forever? And so you'd see these people fall out, and many times they would go out and do the very thing I said earlier. They take their lives or get so wrapped up into the thing that their lives would be ruined. I'm doomed to fail. If they can't do it, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to do it. And sure enough, believing this in the back of my mind, my marriage became choppy at one point. There was some unfaithfulness involved. The next thing I knew, I had a failed marriage. Now you go out, you get a divorce, let me tell you something. You're going to be looked down on by most of the religious establishment. I don't know where it says in their Bible that that's a worse sin than anything else, but you go out, you get a divorce, I'm telling you right now, you're looked down on. And so I thought, you know what? These people are critical of me. They think they're better than me now at this point. I decided it's their fault. So I blame them. I thought, these church people, they're not real. They're a bunch of religious freaks and hypocrites with their so-called godly rules. That's the point I got to. I thought, they're keeping me down. Instead of blaming myself for my failures, of course, I blame God and I blame them. And don't look at me that way, because you know you do the same thing. We're all guilty of doing it. It's always someone else's fault. So I decided I'm going to go out. I'm going to have the time of my life before death comes to me. So I walked in a bar in my 20s. I said, I tried God. Now booze and anything else that comes with the bar scene will be my new game forever. What I basically set my mind to is I was going to live in the bar 7 days a week the rest of my life. Baby, come what may, I was done being the preacher's kid. Now I would row my boat in the direction I wanted to go. That was my new philosophy. God didn't exist. Satan didn't exist. Angels and demons, no. They no longer existed in my world. I believed you died, it was over. But was I in for a rude awakening? Most of you have heard that old song sung by George Thorogood over the years. I drank alone with nobody else. Well, I was the ultimate loner. And if there was ever anybody that song was written for, it was written for me. I didn't need anybody to drink with. In fact, I preferred my own company, and I became what you call the ultimate bar hopper, roaming from town to town, from bar to bar. That was me. The only difference is, I ain't got a tattoo of Rosie on my chest. And I remember there was a new bar in our town that I lived in at that time, and I thought, I'm going to go check it out. So I remember going in this bar, getting a table in the back by myself, ordering my first beer. Suddenly, I was approached by an older woman who introduced herself as Joe. And she asked if she could sit with me. Well, now, when I say Joe was older, she was probably around 30. Well, I was maybe a whopping 25 at that time. I really didn't want company. I really didn't want her to sit down with me, but I also didn't want to insult the lady. There wasn't a lot of people in the bar anyhow, so it wasn't like I had anything else to do. So I said, sure, have a seat. She sat down. We began to talk. Well, Joe immediately begins to hit on me. She told me, she's like, we could go back to my trailer where I got free booze. You wouldn't even have to pay for it. Plus, I almost have anything else that you might want. Now, Joe was a skinny blonde. She was attractive. Thankfully, even though my morals were not of the greatest caliber at that time, I had one specific rule I abided by. And I don't know if it was because of my raising or what, but I did not pick up chicks in bars. But not wanting to insult her, I told her, I said, look, I appreciate your offer. No thanks, I'm not going to go home with you, but if it's cool with you, we could just sit and talk and be friends. The next thing I know, Joe stood up with eyes blazing and pointed her finger at me and said, you're running from God. I was stunned. I sat there with mouth wide open. I didn't know what to say. She said it again. You're running from God, she yelled. And I guess what freaked me out the most, she yelled it in a man's voice. An actual man's voice was coming out of her. I said, how do you know anything about me? I said, you don't know me. She said, oh, but I do. I'm a white witch. I felt a chill run down my spine. To say I was flabbergasted at that time would be an understatement. In my mind, I was thinking, this cannot be real. Demon spirits do not exist. Yet here it was in front of me, a crazy lady speaking in a man's voice like the movie The Exorcist. Now, truth be told, over the years, I've told this story many a times, and I've had people mock me and laugh and say, man, you were a high or messed up. There's no way that could have happened. But as surely as I'm sitting before you online here today, wherever you're at, I'm telling you, it happened exactly that way. Almost word for word, I'm telling you a true story of my life. Now, I had wished at that time I had been higher messed up. Then it would have been a lot easier for my atheist mind to explain at that time. But I'd only drink half a beer, so there was no way I was messed up. No matter how much I wanted to deny it at that time, it was happening. And my dad's occult stories were bouncing around inside my head like a basketball. I'm thinking, well, maybe he was telling me the truth. But I didn't believe in such things. I didn't. I'd never really seen it. Sure, I was raised knowing the Bible. I'd read the Bible. And I did know, as my dad said, that a big part of Jesus and the disciples' ministry had been casting out demon spirits. But I'd never really seen it. All I'd ever seen was religious fakes being a preacher's kid. And I just no longer believed in the Bible. Yet here it was, right in front of me. She had pegged me when she said I was running from God. Again, I wanted a logical explanation to what was happening, but there was none. Joe continued to talk in a deep man's voice. She said, you're a loner. You don't like crowds. And I had noticed Joe had a necklace around her neck, and she kept rubbing it, messing around with it. And it was green and pretty. And I finally said, okay, what's the deal with the necklace? She said, it's my amulet. It's my source of my power. Still speaking in the man's voice, she says, you think my powers are great? My sister's powers are even greater. Well, I was getting antsy by this time. This was getting weirder and weirder by the minute. I was ready to get out of there as fast as I could. Now, Joe sensed I was ready to leave. The next words, though, out of her mouth would stick with me for the rest of my life. She said, before you go, we have a question. Now, the crazy thing, I had noticed Joe said we, as in more than one thing, seemed to be controlling her at that time. I said, oh yeah, what's the question? She said, we want to know how long we have before the end of time. Again, the chill ran down my spine. I thought, once more, this was impossible. Demons didn't exist. Yet here they were asking me, of all people, the prodigal son, how long did they have? Half choking, I told Joe, I said, well, I know my parents are Christians. I said, I know they believe there's not a whole lot of time to the end. Well, the demon spirits inside Joe yelled, we believe we have a long time to the end. Well, that was enough for me. The chill running down my spine was now overwhelming. I told Joe it was good to meet her, but I couldn't get out of that bar fast enough. I remember driving home, laying in my bed that night, saying over and over and over and over in my head, that did not happen, that did not happen, that did not happen. I was an atheist. Such things did not exist. So what did I do? Well, I shrugged off the encounter. I tried to find a logical explanation, obviously. I thought, who knew? Maybe my dad paid her off to come into the bar and put some fear of God into me. I thought, who knew? He might have. But I knew that wasn't true, because there was no way he could know what bar I was in, because I did. I roamed from bar to bar. And also, I knew that man's voice coming out of her had been the real deal. But that's the best explanation my mind could come up with at that time. The next 6 months, I partied harder than ever. 7 days a week, every second I wasn't working. Now here's where the story really gets crazy. I was working in a factory at that time in maintenance. I go walking into my job, and actually walking through the plant doing my job one night. And lo and behold, I look over at a group of people, and in the middle of that group, who do I see but Joe standing there? And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. They had harder into the factory I was working at that time. Well, when I first encountered her, I just tried to walk on and pretend I did not know who she was. Well, it wasn't gonna fly with Joe, though. She seen me, she yelled, I can't believe it. There is Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. Too good to go home with me. She had yelled it in front of that crowd of people that I worked with, for a while. I turned beet red. I thought, well, I'm still going to try to ignore her and go on. But she wasn't going to have it. She said, now you're going to be stuck up and ignore me again, she yelled. And I walked over to her. I'm like, okay, man, look, Joe, I said, I thought we were friends. She said, no, you just think you're too good for me. I said, no, I don't think that, Joe. I said, I just want to be friends. Yet I vowed in the back of my mind at that time, I thought, I am going to do everything I can to avoid this chick from now on. I know I wanted no part of what she possibly represented. She was trouble, I thought, with a capital T. So what did I do? I began to go out of my way to avoid Joe every chance I got. Well, the bad thing, it wasn't going to work with her. A week later, she cornered me in the back of the factory by myself. She walks up and says, well, there's Mr. Goody Two-Shoes again. I guess she had nicknamed me Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. She says, you've been ignoring me. Now that we were alone again, she was talking in the same man's demonic voice she had used in the bar. She said, I will have you wait and see. She said, when I want something, I always get what I want. Well, I could be just as frank. Our first 2 or 3 encounters, she caught me off guard, but I was going to be very frank with her now. I said, I hate to disappoint you, but you are not going to have this boy. She said, you'll see, I'll get you, and turned around and left. Now I thought, man, it's crazy. How could I deny the very thing I was running from? Especially with this chick now working with me in the factory. Well, you know what I did? I partied harder. I thought, I got to get this out of my mind. So every chance I wasn't working, I'd go out and party harder than ever. The only difference was I had a brainstorm. I thought, you know what? I am not going to party in the same town that Joe lived in any longer, or that I lived at that time. I'd heard, as usual, about another new bar that was supposed to be pretty good, and I thought, well, I'm going to drive over to this town about 45 minutes away and check it out. I went into the bar. It was much busier than the bar that I'd met Joe in. I walked around the bar and found a dark corner by myself, ordered my first beer, began to drink. As I was sitting there, I noticed an older woman had come in the door, and she began to move around from table to table. Well, finally, after a while, I seen what she was doing. She was moving from table to table, doing tarot cards with different people, and I thought, oh, great. In the back of my mind, stay away from me. I thought, well, she's on the other side of the bar. I'm over here in a dark corner. Hopefully she'll never see me. About an hour passed, though, and suddenly someone was sitting right beside me. They had slipped up beside me without a sound, and guess who it was? It was the old woman. She had just somehow circled behind me and come up beside me without me even noticing her. And I sat there, I thought, you know, I'm not going to say a word to her. I'm just going to be quiet, and maybe she'll go away and leave me alone. What did she do? She leaned over to me and whispered, you're a Cancer. My reaction was the same as the first time I met Joe. I said, how do you know anything about me? Because it was true. I was born in July. She didn't answer my question immediately, but went on to say, you're a loner, you drink and party alone. She said, you're strong-willed, you don't let people into your life. She said, the only person that you let into your life a little bit is your mom, but you don't tell her a lot. She said, you've always been an outsider, and you always will be. And I said, okay, enough. I said, how do you know any of this? She had pegged me all down the line with everything. I said, how do you know? She said, I'm a practicing white witch. We know these things from study. Again, the chill ran down my back. I said, well, glad to meet you. I got to go. I'd had enough. I couldn't get out of that bar fast enough and get back to my house. And I remember laying on the bed that night, I finally broke down. I finally began to weep. I finally began to say, okay, God, you got me. If there's a Satan and there's demons and there are witches out there, I said, you got me. I believe. You see, Joe had pegged me at the beginning when she said I was running from God. You know, before I got out of church, I'd looked to men instead of God. I'd looked to them for leadership and guidance and as mentors instead of looking to God. Let me tell you something. Men will always fail you because they are not perfect. They are not God. But I also realize, you know what? God was perfect. He had never failed me. He had never moved. He had never forsaken me. He had allowed these things to happen in the bar that I might turn my life around and come back to him. And I did. I realized, as I thought, man, it's time for a change. Time to get right with God. Now, many people think it is a hard thing to change, but it's actually easy. Just a short prayer to him, asking him to forgive you. It wasn't complicated. I didn't do a big, long, drawn-out prayer that night. I vowed I'd do my best to turn my life around. The second I made that decision, friend, I felt like 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off my back. I talk with people all the time that say, I'm going to get right with God one day. I talked to a guy the other day, and he said, I need to start getting right with God and getting in church, just not ready yet. Sometimes it's because people are hooked on booze, or maybe you smoke some weed, or maybe you're on hard drugs. Maybe you're on crack or meth. I've seen it. I told you, I've seen people die from things like that. Or maybe you're into the bar scene where you go pick people up in the bar for sex with no commitment. Maybe you're into pornography. Maybe you're into witchcraft, the occult. It doesn't matter. You can make a ton of excuses for not getting right with God. But you know what the Bible says? It says today is the day of salvation, not tomorrow, friend. You know why? The Bible says we're as a vapor. We're here one second and we're gone the next. Let me tell you, friend, life is short. And yes, God calls for commitment. I want to make a statement to you right now. If you don't get anything else today, I want you to get this. In life, you will gravitate toward the thing you want. I'm going to say it again. In life, you will gravitate toward the thing you want the most. You will. You see these people, they make New Year's resolution. And they say, oh, yeah, I'm going to change. I'm going to lift. I'm going to go on a diet, this and that. 30 days later, they done forgot about it. It's over with. So, yeah, it takes commitment. I like to lift weights. It takes commitment and discipline for me to get my butt up in that gym each and every day. If I'm not committed to do it, I tell you right now, that gym's not going to come down to me and knock on my bedroom door and say, hey, why don't you come up here and lift today? I have to be committed and disciplined in my life to do it. So if you really want to make a commitment to God, you have to have discipline and you have to begin to change. Now, it might take some time to get things in order. I remember it did for me. I didn't get hooked on booze in a day, and I sure wasn't going to quit in a day. Some people do. They get saved and they quit everything. They just can. It wasn't me. So it was a process for me. It took a while to get things in order one by one. But the main thing is praying through and asking forgiveness now and beginning the change. And God will know if you're sincere and you want to change. You see, he looks at the heart, friend. God is a heart doctor. He majors in the heart. He will know if you're serious about changing or not. 1 John 1:9 is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. Why? Because it says if we confess our sins, that's praying, saying the prayer I told you I said earlier, simple, just asking. He is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It's a promise. All you got to do is ask. He will forgive and cleanse you no matter what you've done, no matter how bad you've been. He said it'll be cleansed away. It'll be wiped out, totally gone. John 3:16, for God so loved the world, you all know this one, that he gave his only begotten Son, who is who? Jesus, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Closing this out, years later, I'm giving my testimony in a recovery class. I'm telling about Joe, the older woman, the witchcraft, the occult realm. I'm talking about it. I get done. I go to sit down. I remember a new young lady had showed up in our class for the first time. She yells out as I sit down. She says, "Okay, you got me." She said, "I knew you were a Cancer the second I walked into the room." And yes, she shouted, "I'm a white witch." She pulled a necklace out of her shirt. She said, "Here's my amulet. Over there in my purse are my tarot cards." Now, she said these things, though tears began to run down her face. She said, "Hearing your testimony about God, I never thought of it that way." And I remember she went forward that night and she prayed with the group. Now, most of the people in that group session, they were freaked out afterwards. Why? Because after hearing her story, they realized that a God and a Satan truly do exist. The thing is, no matter where you run, no matter where you hide, one day after this life, you're gonna be with one or the other, my friend. I told this story to a work friend of mine one time, and as I said earlier, most people are at least open-minded to a discussion about God, but some aren't. And every once in a while, you run into somebody that feels they've got to take it a step farther, and they feel like they've really got to criticize you or mock you, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because they themselves aren't living right, or maybe they just really do disbelieve so hard that they just can't really talk about it. But he began to laugh and mock me. He said, "Dude, that is the craziest story I've ever heard." He said, "You were messed up or high." He said, "That didn't happen." And I looked at him. I said, "Look, man, I'm a straight shooter. I am. I'm a very blunt person. I tell you, I'm the kind of guy I tell you like it is. I don't beat around the bush. I've got a serious personality." I said, "Why would I make up a lie and make up a story like that?" I said, "There's no reason why I would be lying to you about something like that." He said, "Well, I don't believe it." He said, "There is no God. You die, it's over." He said, "They throw you in a box and throw dirt on top of you." I looked at him. It was like looking at myself in a mirror some 20 years earlier. He was a clone of what I used to say. I shrugged my shoulders. I knew there was nothing I could say that would change his mind. You see, it's your choice. No one can row or sail your boat of life except you. 3 weeks later, my work friend was drunk. He was riding a motorcycle at high speeds in the rain when off the highway crashed into a tree. He was killed instantly. Tragically killed. Now, where's he at now? I don't know. I don't know. I can only hope he made it. That's all I could do. Only God knows. You see, you're the captain of your life. You are. Nobody else could do it for you. Where will you be when you die? I want to thank you today for joining us out of the far. Remember, no matter what you're facing, you don't have to walk through it alone. You don't. Together, we can rise, we can rebuild, and live better lives. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and let's keep moving forward together in life. We are praying believers here. If you have a prayer request, please send us a message on the link below and we will get back a hold of you. Have a blessed week. Until next time, thank you.